We are live.
Cool. Welcome, everyone. I am Brian. I am here to draw.
I've got a question for you right off the bat.
Okay, what do you got?
Okay, this is from RF.
Okay.
They ask, can you please help me create a timetable? As an art student, how should I divide my day to practice different subjects? How much time should I allocate to each subject? Also, can you share what your typical day was like when you were studying at Watts?
Man, complicated question.
That was like
Okay.
5 questions.
Right off the bat.
Questions.
As far as studying, I mean, I would treat it as though you were a student at a place like Watts, is the way I would treat it. You know, so figure out like what classes you would be taking essentially, and say, you know, maybe you're going to be doing, figure out what you have time for first, and how many days a week you have to study, how much time per day, and then plan it out as though you were a student at a school is what I usually recommend, because that's what I did. I mean, I was a student at a school and it worked pretty well for me. And so essentially you would say like, okay, I need to study head drawing, figure drawing, maybe quick sketch, maybe, you know, just basically figure out kind of what level you're at, what fundamental stuff you need, what more advanced stuff, I don't know, whatever it is you need for where you're at. And literally treat it like you're at a school and say like, okay, on, you know, today's my head drawing class, and so I'm going to study head drawing, and I'm going to, you know, watch this demo or whatever, and then do my drawing for, you know, a couple hours, 2 or 3 hours maybe. And then it depends on what you have time for, you know, like if you literally have nothing to do all day except study, I mean, you could maybe do 2 classes per day. You know, as far as what I was doing at Watts when I was a student, I mean, I was pretty fortunate in the sense that I was able to take a lot of classes. You know, I was able to take like, I don't know, anywhere from 2 or 3 classes a day. And I was there probably 6, sometimes 7 days a week, because they would have like a workshop that they would run on Sundays. And so I was there a lot, like a lot. But part of that was to make up for the fact that, I don't know, like when I first started, I didn't have the best habits. And so I wasn't drawing on my own really, like at home or anything like that. And the only way I would draw, even though I liked it, for whatever reason, the only way I would draw is in class, you know, and it kind of forced me to sit down and work, you know. So yeah, that's kind of my answer. I don't know if that answered everything. It was a long question. What else was there?
They were just asking about dividing the day into to practice different subjects. I mean, if you were taking a class, obviously each class was, you know.
Yeah, I mean, like at Watts, there was the opportunity to take up to 3 classes per day. Each class was 3 hours long, and they would have 3 per day. Depending on what you sign up for, you could do 3 classes per day. But it was a lot. I mean, most people didn't do that. I was very unique in that sense. You know, most people did like anywhere from 1 to 4 classes per week, maybe. But I signed up to the point where I was doing like 2 or 3 a day, almost every day. But what's interesting is I couldn't do that at first, right? That's something that I had to like work my way up to. And at first, just doing 1 class, by the end of 1 class on 1 day, my arm would be dead. It would be tired. It would be, you know, and I would be all wiped out, and it wasn't working well. And so I kind of just kept practicing and kept doing that over and over. And eventually I got to the point where by the end of the term, by the end of a class, you know, my arm felt fine. It wasn't tired. And so then I would start adding more, and I would do 2 classes in a row, and then 3 classes in a row. You know, at first 3 classes in a row, I mean, that's like 9 hours of class time in 1 day. And it would wipe me out. I mean, I'd be all sore. My arm would be all weak and tired. And what I noticed was every single time I went through one of those periods where I pushed myself to the point where my arm got really tired, my dexterity would increase, you know, and it was sort of like working out is what I realized. You know, you work out, you lift a bunch of weights, you get really tired and sore, and then you get stronger and you adapt. And yeah, that's kind of it. And so over time, I just kept pushing to the point where I was doing more and more and more. And then eventually I got to the point where I could do 9 hours of class time in a day, and it was no big deal. You know, I was fine. But when I first started, I wasn't able to do that at all. It was something I had to work my way up to. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. As far as like what subjects to study, I mean, again, I would just go look at like, and this totally depends on what level you're at, right? Like, I don't know what skill level you're at. If you're just working on pure fundamentals, then you're going to be studying things like head drawing, figure drawing, maybe like throwing some 20-minute stuff to speed things up a little bit once you kind of start getting the hang of it. You know, you can do some drapery, you can do cast studies. I mean, there's all sorts of things you could do. I mean, there's an endless amount of fundamental stuff you could study. But if you're at the point where you already know a lot of that stuff and it's becoming somewhat intuitive and you don't have to think about it very much, then you can start throwing in some more advanced stuff, you know, and start getting into like composition and painting and color and things that are, you know, way more complicated and sort of build on top of that fundamental stuff. Anyway, today we are drawing a male head. And we're going to be looking up at him a little bit. I guess everybody can see. Can you go to OBS possibly so I can see what I'm doing in real time? Oh, yeah, there we go. That's better. Yeah, so it's a head, and we're looking up at him a little bit. Not a lot, but a bit. He's got his head leaned back a little bit, and I partly chose it because I'm running a class next term about head, like up and down head tilts. And the way the class is going to work is they'll start out kind of like this, where we're kind of like, he has his head just leaned back a little bit, and then I'll choose more extreme tilts. You know, the first couple of weeks will probably be like an up tilt, and then like a subtle down tilt, and then they'll get more extreme as we go to the point where they're like way back and much more challenging. So I figured I would throw one of these in here and have a go at it. Okay, so we're going to start with the big shape of the head. So we're going to start with the cranial mass. And since his head's tilted back a little bit, we're going to take that typical cranial mass shape that I put down, and we're going to tilt it a little bit, right, to kind of match his head. Now his head's not turned very far, so it's still a pretty round shape, but it should look something like this. Let me zoom in here a little bit. There we go. Right, we're going to take that shape and kind of like tilt it back, you know, as though he were tilting his head back. Also, I'm going to drink some of this delicious Coca-Cola. Sorry, you guys are going to have to listen to me make drinking noises. Okay, so we've got our cranial mass. We've tilted it back a little bit. Side plane of the head is going to drop down this side over here. It's kind of wrapping around the forehead, kind of coming back around this direction. A little bit like that, right? It like kind of pops out towards the cheek and then kind of comes back. About like that, right? Then we get the back of the head kind of coming down this way towards the jawline. And notice right now I'm keeping my lines nice and light and loose, and you know, there's not like a lot of complicated stuff happening yet. And also, nothing that I can't erase or move or change really easily. You know, like I can get rid of these construction lines really quick if we need to. Okay, so this kind of swoops down, and it's going to swoop into his jaw down here. And he has a really big jaw, and that's part of what makes him really tough to draw. And then on top of that, he's got a big beard, which makes it even more challenging. Right, his chin's kind of sitting back around here somewhere. Now, the head right now, this shape, it might be a little bit too tall because he does have his head leaned back, but at the same time, he has a very tall head. So even though it's leaned back a little bit, I feel like it's probably still going to be pretty tall. For a better kind of rhythmical sweep down into the jaw. Looks pretty good. Again, keep in mind, we can adjust this if we need to, right? And that's why we're keeping our lines all light and simple, right? And sticking with C curves, S curves, and straights. Because as long as we keep our construction really simple, then we can change it anytime we need to. right? So we've got kind of the back of the jaw and the front of the ear sitting back here. Pretty extreme angle. And then we've got the center line now, which is going to be tilted back because his head's tilted back. So if you think about it, right, like usually when we talk about tilts, like side to side tilts, you want to tilt the center line and like the brow line and nose line, like keep them perpendicular. But the exception to that is if the head's tilted back or tilted down. In that case, then we're going to have the center line tilt back a bit, maybe not this much, or maybe that's okay. I don't know. Doesn't seem too far off because he's got his head tilted back. Right, so the center line will tilt, but then the brow line and nose line and, you know, hairline, all that are going to stay relatively flat, even though the center line's tilted. And that occurs like when the head tilts either back or forward. Now, in this case, I think there's some like kind of photographic perspective going on here where the camera's kind of close to him. So we're picking up a little bit of perspective on his head as well, right? So his hairline, since his head's tilted back, his hairline is like way up at the top up here. It's like way up here, right? And then we're going to have the brow line up here somewhere, right? And again, that's going to have a bit of an angle to it simply because of the perspective on the head, right? And then we'll have the nose down here, right? Which is starting to flatten out. Notice our perspective is kind of changing here a bit, right? A little more extreme, a little less extreme, kind of flat. And then I would guess if we keep going, the chin probably actually goes the other direction a little bit, but we can't see it because it's under the beard. So don't need to worry about that too much. Right, so we kind of get our connections here. Now I'm going to just kind of double check some of these angles and double check the proportions, right? So what I'm seeing in the reference is, you know, usually we would have equal thirds, or in his case, he has a really big jaw. Like, so on him, the bottom third of his head, like between the nose connection point and the chin, would be larger than the top 2/3. But in this case, since his head's leaned back, the top 2/3 are still relatively equal, I think. No, the forehead's a bit small. Let's see if I can measure this properly here. Yeah, forehead's a little smaller. Then we get our middle third. And then the bottom third now looks really big, right? So we should have that happen in here too, where these two sections are I'm going to say we move this up more. Maybe move this up a little bit more. Right, so now let's see if we can find this one. That goes up over the top of the head a little bit. That's pretty good. And this leaves a pretty big jaw space down here. So I feel like that's kind of matching what I'm seeing in the reference. Just real roughly. You know, so again, think about the head as like a boxy type shape. What we're seeing here is something kind of like this. You know, so we'll have a separation between the front plane and the side plane, and then we get the side plane sitting out here. Again, kind of tilted back a bit.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
This is from Jay Brashears.
Okay.
Who asks, how do you deal with lens distortion in photo reference? I'm struggling not to overcorrect and flatten the face too much.
That's a good idea, or a good question. I mean, that's exactly kind of what we're dealing here with a little bit, which is, you know, what effect does the camera have on the person, you know? And so studying perspective can help with that. And because what's really happening here is, I'll show it like down here. If we draw a box, right, say we were just looking at regular perspective, and we're saying like, here's our horizon line, right? And say we've got like some vanishing points, okay? And then we draw a box, which maybe looks like this, right? Goes to the vanishing points, boom, boom, right? Say there's our box. And then there's a bottom as well, obviously, but for demo purposes, we don't need to worry about that too much. Okay, so when we see a photograph where the perspective is really flat, what's happening is the person that took the photo was standing farther away, and then they had a zoom lens and zoomed in. And that has the effect of taking our vanishing points and moving them farther out, right? And that tends to flatten things out. So that's typically what you want in a lot of like illustration type stuff. But we can use the opposite of that to our advantage. If you're doing like a horror illustration, you want something to feel like it's coming out at the camera kind of. And that basically means like we're going to add more perspective to the photo. And the way that happens is we take our vanishing points and move them inward. And then the perspective becomes more extreme, right? So if we take these vanishing points and we move them in, then suddenly we have a box with way more extreme perspective, right? And it's much more distorted. You know, we end up with something like this. Right? Like this looks way more distorted than that. This one looks flattened out. This one looks more like more extreme perspective, right? This is the equivalent of zooming out with the lens, like zooming all the way out and then getting really close to the person, right? So if you're really close to them, it's going to have this effect on the head. And that means that all the angles for the perspective stuff, like if you think of the head as a box, all the angles on that box are going to be really extreme. Versus, you know, if you get farther back from a person and zoom in with your lens, and then it takes those vanishing points, shifts them way out, and gives you an image that's flatter. So that's really the difference. And so that's why I'm saying studying perspective can help with that, because when you look at the photo, like I can look at a photo now and immediately say like, oh, okay, there's a lot of distortion here. So I need to treat this as though my vanishing points on the box are like moved inward, you know, and like really narrow. Or maybe, you know, if it's a different image where everything's really flat, then I think of them as being really far out, or just ignore them altogether and just keep everything level, you know. So I would recommend doing some perspective studies and drawing a ton of boxes to practice drawing boxes, like different types of boxes, more flat type boxes, more perspective-y type boxes. And then you'll get to the point eventually where you can look at the reference and just kind of know exactly which one you need. Right? So right now we're looking at this box, you know, as being like tilted back. And we're seeing like this kind of shape here on the box. If I can draw this. Oops, let's go up a little bit. I don't know, something like that. Not the best box I've ever drawn. Looks something like that, but you can see like kind of how that perspective, like we get more angled line up here, little less angled, and then maybe starts flattening out down here. you know, and then it sort of wraps around. Same way, a little more angle, a little less, a little flatter. And so I'm not working it out. Like, I don't know where these vanishing points are. I'm just guessing. But the reason it works is because I've drawn a lot of boxes and I can guess reasonably well. Even though this isn't actually accurate, it would work as a drawing. You know, so as you can see, our vanishing, or our measurement lines here now are going to wrap around the head, just like they're wrapping around the box. You know, and that kind of shows us where our ear is going to sit. So as the head tilts back, the ear and the corner of the jaw move down, right? So the ear now is going to sit kind of out here. Corner of the jaw is like down here. Part of this is just practice, right? And drawing a lot of heads, but then also drawing a lot of boxes. I mean, it sounds weird, but it's something that helped me tremendously. It's just drawing a ton of basic shapes. So that's kind of our starting point for the head. If we could see underneath here, like if there was no beard, we would probably be seeing a little bit of the underplane of the jaw, but there is a beard, so I'm not really seeing that. Right, so then we'll just kind of keep moving and finding a little bit of kind of where the glabella shape sits, which on him is not super pronounced. Right, kind of find the inside of this eye socket over here. Right, and then we're going to have these points kind of running up and over this corner here. Right, so it's kind of like flat, and then a little bit rounded, and then it kind of drops back into this side a little bit over here. Same thing over here. It's kind of like a little bit flat, and then a little bit rounded, and then it's going to kind of pull back in that direction. Now, what's tough about the tilt and like, or if his head's tilted back, or if we just have the camera low and we're looking up at him, then the relationship between the nose and this eye socket over here becomes really important, right? So I'm going to come in here and just immediately find kind of the angle of the nose, right, which is about like that, and see if we can get that connected first.
With another question quickly here.
Yeah.
Because I think what you're doing is all going to be kind of related to Jay's question.
Yeah.
Because it's a tilted, well, slightly like looking up at him kind of pose.
Yeah.
But there's another question here from Justin, who says, "Hi Brian, love your work. Question, how to figure out the width of head when comparative measurements atop the head?" I'm not certain exactly. I think this is maybe like a translation of English. How to figure out the width of the head when comparing the measurement to the top of the head? Maybe like the height to width.
Yeah, if you're talking about like the height to width relationship and how to figure that out, I mean, you could measure, right? Like there was a point in time as a student where I would measure like the actual width of the head, and then I would kind of do this and try to figure out how they relate. So I'd be able to lean over here to the reference and say, well, the width of the head across maybe the eyes to the back of the head is equal to the chin, maybe to just above the brow line. Right, so we could say the chin to just above the brow line is about like that, should be about equal to there, right? So it's just comparative measurement, you know, and we're going in and just looking for any sort of relationship we could find. It could be almost anything. It could be, you know, the width of the jaw. It could be, the problem is it's not a perfect system. Like measuring is kind of difficult and challenging, and it doesn't there's no, I guess what I'm saying is like, there's no substitute for just practicing drawing a lot to gain the ability to judge those things properly. Now, you need to, do some measurements and stuff at first before your brain will start doing it automatically. So it's important to do those. But we need to find a way to kind of get our brain to like do that on its own after a while. Because if you notice, like I didn't do that here. Like I just went in and went straight for the head shape, and I can just look at the shape of the head in the reference, and I can look at my drawing, and I can see that they're pretty close. Like they're not perfect, but they're close enough that they'll work. But it took me a long time to get to the point where I could do that. That didn't just happen automatically. And so, yeah, measuring like that and using comparative measurement is helpful for sure. Also, right now, I feel like the nose might be a little bit long. I don't know. We'll keep going. We'll see what happens here. Cheekbones out here, right? And our face is going to kind of swoop around this direction. It's looking pretty good. And so this, for this eye socket, it's going to kind of cut up in here a little bit and down and kind of back up. Yeah, and especially like, because you're talking about like height to width ratios. To me, a lot of that and my ability to do that came from drawing basic shapes and just drawing a lot of boxes. Boxes and cylinders, and it's really incredibly helpful. And just being able to judge, because that's ultimately where I learned to judge, like how wide should the front plane of the face be versus this side. Where do we place the center line in a way that makes sense in perspective? Like all of that comes from drawing a ton of boxes and practicing dividing those boxes and studying a little bit of perspective here and there. Understanding the whole like X finds center, in perspective. Like if we're drawing a box in perspective, then crossing the corners is going to help us find like exactly where the center is in perspective, and that's going to help us figure out. So you'll notice like it kind of shifts back a little bit in perspective. So we're doing the same thing here. It doesn't line up with the exact center of the chin. I'm kind of like pushing it back a little bit. And that is, I don't know, had a big influence on how I drew heads. Something I can't stress enough is basic shapes and perspective are really helpful and important. Add a little bit of forehead on here. Right, his forehead kind of wraps around that way, and then back behind here. It's about like that, right? And so we take this bottom third now, and we break it into thirds, and that's going to help place the mouth. And the chin, and then his head's tilted back as well, so we can have these spaces get a little bit bigger as they go down. I think that'll be okay. So his mouth is going to be sitting like kind of way down here. Remember that there's a tooth cylinder as well, right? So that's going to kind of be projecting and pushing the mouth forward a little bit, right? Kind of like that. And then the chin kind of projects forward. But again, a lot of this we're not seeing because of the beard, but the mouth is going to sit probably right around here. And then we'll have to just kind of design the beard around that, right? I might wait a second for the beard. His eyes are going to sit up in here, right? We need the opening of the eye socket, which is going to be in here, and here, right? Leave a little bit of room for bone. And then that opening of the eye socket on him is kind of doing this type of shape. And then, of course, in reality, it also drops down this direction and then sort of connects back into our eye socket if we want to like really find that opening. You know, something kind of like that. Okay, so let's get maybe a beard shape at his neck. His beard is really important because it makes up a big part of his head. You know, like it like kind of has a big influence on the shape of his head, right? So before I get into like nostrils and features and stuff, I'm going to go in here and just get the big shape of the beard. So it's kind of coming down from here, dropping down this way a little bit, and dropping down this way. Right, and so from there, it's going to basically wrap around the head, kind of like that. It's going to kind of cut back this direction.
Got a comment to read to you here.
Okay.
This is from Nivad.
Okay, Nivad.
This is a really interesting comment. He says, I'm a student with Watts Online.
Yeah.
He says he watched your fundamentals videos and practiced from the workbooks. And
Yeah.
It took about 10 months before he started to notice that you were thinking in 3D when making your lines, and he was trying to memorize them in 2D.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that's something that I stress in my teaching a lot more. You know, and to be honest, back when I was teaching at Watts, I don't even know that I totally understood that myself. I mean, I did, but I don't know, like not to the extent that I do now. And the way that I draw now is a little bit different. A little different. I mean, it's the same, but I'm better at it than I was back then, first off. And then also, I don't know, like I've gotten better at teaching and explaining things as well. You know, things have changed a bit, but you're exactly right. Like what I'm thinking in three-dimensionally, right? Like I'm thinking of boxes, I'm thinking of cylinders, and I'm thinking about kind of like cutting and carving into those shapes, right? And you're right that when you first start out, that's not really possible because our brains don't do that automatically. Like it's something that has to be learned, and it's something that has to be practiced over and over, and it just doesn't happen on its own. I wish it did. It'd make life a lot easier. But you're right that eventually you reach the point where you start to realize like, oh, wait a minute. These are actually three-dimensional forms that we're moving around and changing and manipulating, and not just like two-dimensional lines on paper, even though that's technically what they are. I mean, they actually are two-dimensional images, but we're recreating three-dimensional thinking on like a two-dimensional surface. So yeah, it's a really good observation, and one that tells me that you're probably are much better at drawing now, because it takes a while to get to the point where you realize that's the case. You know, it took me a long time to get to that point, and I started out the exact same way, just like you said, which is thinking of these things as just like two-dimensional, you know. And it took me years to get to the point where I realized like, wait a minute, we're not actually doing two-dimensional drawing here. Even though it's a two-dimensional surface and it technically is a two-dimensional drawing, if you want it to look good, then we need to describe it three-dimensionally. And that's like a whole different thing, right? And that's where you start getting into this kind of stuff. and figuring out like how things are wrapping around the box, right? When I wrap these lines around here, it's literally this, just then kind of in the form of a head. You know, it's the exact same thinking. You know, I'm doing the same thing with the beard now, right? The beard isn't a two-dimensional shape. The beard is like, it has a thickness to it. It wraps around his head. And so we're going to have to figure out how to make that happen. Not just two-dimensionally, but three-dimensionally. His chin kind of pops up here. You know, so now as I start working my way around here, I've got to start thinking about, you know, three-dimensionally, how is this going to work? How is this going to happen? This needs to kind of connect around this way, back around here, you know, and so we've got his cheek kind of dropping down this direction. And then we've got the beard kind of coming out this way and wrapping around like this, and like kind of again making like a three-dimensional form. And then we get the rest of the beard coming out this direction. Right, bottom of the beard down here. Kind of sits right down in there. Again, another thing that's tricky is we're seeing some of the top lip, but it's in shadow, right? So that's kind of why I drew this earlier, where I kind of drew like this second line up here, is to kind of show that we're seeing some of that lip in there. And this is actually like a three-dimensional mustache form here, and then the lip kind of curls back in, and then it kind of comes back out. You know, so we can come in here and refine this a little bit, maybe change up some of our shapes. But again, notice the first thing I did was I designed this as straights a little bit, and here to kind of help judge some of the angles and stuff. And now I'm going back and kind of changing it up and, you know, adding some subtle curves back in to get it all to read the way I want it to. You know, so then we can put a neck on here. That might be helpful. Make sure we're seeing things properly. Yeah, that was a really good question, though, about the three-dimensional forms or statement, because you're absolutely right. And it's something that I think every single person has to go through, is that stage where you start out thinking of things two-dimensionally, and it takes a while to get to the point where you start realizing, oh, wait a minute, this is actually three-dimensional thinking and not two. And what we're trying to do is find ways to represent three-dimensional thinking on a two-dimensional surface. And that complicates things. It's not easy.
Okay, I got some more questions and comments for you.
Okay, same with this neck. It's a big cylinder. But yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so first, Alex Quinn says, "Hi, Brian."
Alex, welcome. And hello.
Alex is here. Let's see. So I'll just go in order.
Okay.
First is from RF, who says, "After studying for 9 hours at Watts, did you also practice at home?"
No, after studying for 9 hours at Watts, that would be it. But I will say the whole reason I studied that much at Watts was because my habits were so bad. I didn't draw much at home starting out, and eventually I got better at it. And that was kind of my plan going in. I was like, well, I like to draw, but for some reason have developed very horrible habits throughout my life. And I just wasn't drawing at home. I was always distracted and it just wasn't happening. And so that was partly why I took as many classes as I did. And honestly, I don't know if I've seen anybody else take that many classes at Watts, at least not in the time that I was there. But part of my plan was to force myself to draw every day and eventually develop better habits to get to the point where I can draw on my own. And now I have a whole business where I draw every day on my own, basically, and so I think my plan worked, at least to an extent, but it forced me into that situation where, I paid money for a class and I need to go show up, I'm expected to be there. And then there's a specific time where they're going to say, okay, now you sit down and draw, and that's it. And then you do it, and so I did that for a number of years and then eventually started teaching and I don't know, I almost immediately went from like student to teacher, which was a little unusual as well. I don't think that's pretty typical, but fortunately my plan worked reasonably well and my ability to work on my own increased over time. But what's tough is like, I know most people aren't in a situation where you can say like, oh, I'm just going to go sign up for like 1,000,000 Watts classes and go live in Encinitas and do in-person classes. Like that's usually not an option for most people. So that's why I usually try and stress like when you're studying, you have to treat this as though you were at an actual school. I mean, you got to think of it that way. They used to tell us at Watts, they used to tell us like, if you want to do this for a living, if you want to draw and for a living and make money doing that, the amount of training it takes to get to that point is almost a full-time job in itself, And so there's some people over the years that I saw that they wanted that really bad and they were able to fit that in while also working full-time jobs. And they would wake up early in the morning and train for an hour or two, and then they'd go work all day, and then they'd come home and train for like a few more hours. And they just kept doing that. And eventually they got really good. But you got to really, really want to do it for that to work, because that is not an easy thing to do. I don't know. I have a lot of respect for those people, because that is a tough way to practice and learn. Okay, so let's see if we can find, I forget what the question was. Did I answer it?
Yeah, you answered it.
Oh.
It's just asking, did you study at home after studying at Watts? Or practice at home, rather?
Oh, yeah. Eventually, yes. Eventually, I got to the point where I would do some classes during the day, and then I would come home in the evening and like work on a master's study or something. Yeah, I did it eventually. Just not right away. But yeah.
Okay, so next question is from Navad.
Okay, Navad.
And I think this is more of a comment, just building on your last talk where you were talking about thinking in 3 dimensions and not 2 dimensions, which I've experienced that in my art too. It was almost like a turning point in my thinking, in my drawings. And it totally changes everything once you learn to think that way.
It really does, yeah.
But Navad says it shows that for beginners, it really, really pays off to not skip the fundamentals and be patient with it. It takes time to internalize. That's so true.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. Because it does take time, and that's part of what's so frustrating about learning to draw is it's not a fast process, and there's so many different like aspects to it. It's partly like mental, and training our brain to be able to judge proportion and to see things a certain way, and then there's like a knowledge component where we have to know some anatomy and some like, how do we start a drawing? How do we approach it? How do we, have we memorized an abstraction? Have we memorized like the construction breakdown on a generic head? You know, so there's like a knowledge component. And then on top of that, there's like a dexterity, like a physical component. And if all of these things aren't working together really well, then you're going to have a really hard time drawing, you know, and that's just unfortunately the way it works, which is a little frustrating, but at the same time, once you really work through it and it starts to pay off, it's much more rewarding. It's pretty fun. I don't like that other nostril. It's too big. But yeah, it's a very complex thing to do. Drawing is not easy. It is very complicated.
I used to tell people, like, you have to like drawing enough, or at least want to draw well enough,
Yeah.
that you can tolerate drawing badly for many years.
Yeah, I used to tell that to
know?
people too.
Yeah.
And that's really what it comes down to, is the people that get really, really good at drawing are the people that just like to do it so much that they're going to do it whether they're good at it or bad at it. You know, like the fact that their drawings are bad doesn't stop them from drawing. Because it's hard and it just takes a long time to get to that point where you're good. And if you're the type to be discouraged by doing a bad drawing, then it's going to be really hard because you're going to have to do a whole lot of bad drawings before you get to the good ones. I mean, it's just kind of the way it is. So if you're doing bad drawings, don't be too discouraged, because literally everybody does a lot of bad drawings. It's the only way to get to the point where you can do good drawings. I have done many, many, many bad drawings. And what's cool is, so far, at least in the time that I've been an instructor and drawing, pretty much everybody I've seen put in the effort eventually gets reasonably good at this, you know? And so, yeah, you might be doing a lot of bad drawings, but they're just getting you closer to the good ones, ultimately, even if it doesn't feel like it. And a lot of people, like, they kind of plateau after a while, and that's just kind of part of it, unfortunately, is you'll kind of hit a point where you know, maybe you're not improving quite as much, or you're not, like, I don't know, maybe you go backwards a little bit. That's happened to me a number of times, is you start out pretty good and then you kind of like go backwards, unfortunately. It can happen. Not liking that far nostril shape, but we'll come back to that. Let's get an eye in here. That might be a good idea. There's just so much you have to know. You know, like, it's not just dexterity, but, you know, if you're drawing a head, how much do you know about eyes? How much do you know about noses? How much do you know about lips? And then once you kind of get a good generic understanding of how those things work, then it comes down to, can you manipulate and change them to fit different types of people and make them look like whoever it is you're trying to draw? See if we can get a decent eye shape on here. Kind of looking up at the eye a bit. You know, so that means we're going to be seeing up into it. So we're seeing probably some of this upper lid and then some of the ball of the eye up into here. And then we're probably not seeing much of the top plane of the bottom lid because we're looking up at him. You know, so we're going to be looking up into this lid more and not down at this one. Again, it's a pretty complicated little scenario. You know, his bottom lid kind of does something like this. You know, we get this other eye, similar to this one, but coming out and around. Kind of pops out. Wraps around. It needs to be a little bigger. Out. Around. And kind of back in a little bit. You know, I have a whole class that I teach about facial features, and we talk about how do the eyes work, right? What's all the three-dimensional forms involved, and then what happens when the eyes are turned? What happens when just the eyes are looking one way or another? You know, in this case, you'll notice that they're both kind of going that direction, right? Like the high point here is on this side, and the high point on this one is kind of over on this side, because his head's turned and turned back a little bit. It's just a complicated situation. You know, and then we're looking up into his eye here. Seems pretty good. Those feel like they go together. And then nobody's face is perfectly symmetrical either, you know, like there's slight differences between his eyes. So we kind of have to decide, do we want to capture those, or do we want to kind of like even things out a little bit? How do we want to handle this? In this case, there's like a fat pad that kind of sits underneath the brow bone. And on him, it's kind of like sitting in a way where his eyes, instead of tucking right up under the bone, they're kind of tucking up under that pad. So we're kind of creating this little shape above here for the eyelids. Right, same thing over here. It's kind of wrapping back around this way. And then up and over. It's tough because, you know, his eye's like in shadow. So you can't see exactly what's going on up here. Or at least not past this point. But it's basically just kind of wrapping around that way. Not at an angle though. Something kind of like that, right? And then we can maybe get a little bit more of this bottom lid on here. It's looking pretty good. Not liking this shape. It's a little too squared off for his type. A little bit more lower lid on here. You know, and then we can kind of maybe refine the shape of the nose, come in here and find a little bit more of, say, the kind of like the nasal bone where that sticks out. It's kind of coming out this direction. We want to keep this really subtle, right? And then it kind of pops back down a little bit, right? And then we get the ball of the nose a bit bigger and kind of out this way. You know, kind of refine that nose shape a little bit. Sorry, I should have stayed zoomed in. That's looking pretty good. Feels like his type, at least. And so from here, we can decide what we want to do, right? We can come in here and kind of keep adding more features. I guess we can add some irises, maybe. Some pupils. Here. And up in here. Although right now this one feels bigger than that one. That's not good. It's not a good sign. This one, if anything, should be a little bit smaller because it's farther away from us. So I'm just going to slow down a little bit, be a little bit more careful. Especially because, to be honest, I haven't drawn much this last week, and so I'm a little bit rusty.
Can I throw a couple more questions at you?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. This one's from a little while ago, from before when Alex said hi, so this is
Okay.
like 10, 15 minutes ago. From Constantinus, who says, "Hi Brian, question. Does a black eraser, plastic, similar to the white version, erase and pick up debris from the paper? Is that the candle hold hand position?" Oh, I think two separate questions, it seems like.
Oh, so the black eraser, someone asked that earlier. Where did we see that earlier? Was it someone on YouTube?
It was a YouTube
I think it was a YouTube comment.
But different person.
Different person?
Yeah.
Where's all these black erasers coming from? I don't know. I don't use a black eraser. I actually have one sitting here, just coincidentally, which I never use, but it just happens to be sitting here. It's the only one I've ever had. What were they asking about it? Like if it picks up?
If it picks up debris from the paper. I don't think so.
So what I would say is the black eraser that I have doesn't pick up anything from the paper other than what you're trying to erase. But there's so many different types of erasers out there that I believe it's totally possible you could have one that does something like that. And if you do, I don't know. I guess it depends on what you mean by black eraser also, because there's this, right, which goes with, oh, I don't have it here. This goes with like a clicky eraser thing, right? There's like a little eraser holder and these things come out. This is the only black eraser I have, but as you can see, it doesn't like leave any marks or anything, and it erases pretty well. It's fine. It gets the job done, I think. That seems okay. Seems like it maybe messed up the paper a little bit, but that's why wouldn't use this on newsprint necessarily. We just use these like kneaded erasers. But if you mean like black eraser, meaning like this eraser, which initially is a kneaded eraser, they start out like this color. And then as I pick up more and more charcoal, they get darker and darker. But I'm guessing that's not what you're talking about. I'm guessing you're talking about like this, like an actual black eraser. And if that's the case, then I've never seen one that leaves anything on the paper. And I've also never seen one that picks up anything like debris, I think you're asking about. So yeah, I don't know. To be honest, my real answer is I don't know much about black erasers because I don't use them. And the one that I have seems like it would work well in like a graphite type situation. But yeah, I don't know. It's a mystery. Or at least a mystery that's not going to be solved during this live stream probably.
I do have one bit of information that I can offer.
Okay.
So I was looking into this when someone asked about it earlier.
Yeah.
And Statler creates erasers, the plastic type, that have quote unquote minimal crumbling.
Interesting.
But it's not just the black one, it's black or white plastic erasers. So I think some have minimal crumbling, but
So yeah, it sounds like there are some minimal crumbling erasers out there.
Yeah.
Some of them are black, some are white. And if you're having crumbling issues, then maybe that would help. Okay, I should probably do some more work here. We're an hour in and I've done very little. Let's draw an ear. Let's get some ear stuff on here. Let's draw an ear and then we'll get this thing like mapped. Maybe, I don't know, we'll see how much time we have. I mean, if there's more questions, you can keep asking them. I just,
Okay.
yeah.
There are.
Okay,
There are some more questions.
that's cool.
I'll read the next one from Celsius.
Okay,
It
Celsius.
says, hey guys, how's it going? I heard a trick for finding thirds, which is to draw an X in a square and add the center line, and then draw the X in the now rectangles, which the X intersects, and that's where the thirds go.
Wow, so Celsius, it's a trick for finding thirds.
Yes.
What was it? You draw,
Okay, you draw an X in a square,
yeah?
you add a center
Oh, let's try
line.
this. Hang on, let me draw a square.
Okay, yeah, try it.
Draw an X. So here's a square. Draw an X. I'm guessing they mean like cross corners.
Not small in any place. It's probably gonna go across the whole thing.
What?
No, you're doing it right.
Oh, okay.
I'm just being silly.
Okay, we draw an X. Then what?
Did you do the whole X? I can't see it.
Yeah,
from
there's
here.
an X.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then you draw a line across the middle for the center line.
Like, oh, like this way? Like center line like this?
Yeah, add the center line.
Okay.
And draw an X in the now rectangles.
Oh, so they're saying like, wait, that doesn't make sense. That should just be the same point. Oh, I see what they're saying. They're talking about thirds like, okay, I get it. But then if we go this way, this would be thirds, right? So if I had drawn,
I don't know.
I do know.
Okay.
I do know. I did it kind of wrong, but I know what they're talking about. My only objection to this, well, I think it does work for sure. My only objection would be that it takes a long time. And my recommendation would be to just practice drawing boxes and breaking them up into thirds, right? And then double check and measure and make sure they're correct. And eventually you'll train your brain to just recognize when something is exact thirds and when it's not, right? So in this case, this would be middle this way, right? And then you would go this one, and this one. And you have this one. Wait a minute. This is going to be more than thirds. This is going to be quarters.
That's a lot.
That's quarters. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, no, I'm confused. The way I was doing it breaks it up into even quarters. I don't know about thirds. Anyway, my recommendation, because like that's a lot of work to do if you're constructing a head. You know, my recommendation, and what I did personally was I did spend a lot of time practicing drawing squares and boxes and rectangles, all sorts of stuff like that. And then I would just practice breaking them into thirds, right? I would say, okay, here's a center line. And then I would measure and make sure my center line was pretty exact. And then I would say, okay, I'm going to break this space into thirds. And then I would measure again.
Navad says we got tricked.
Yeah, we
Is
did
this a
get tricked.
prank?
Yeah, right. And then I would measure again. This is going to be the most boring live stream. It's going to be me just drawing thirds.
Okay, there's other questions, so.
Okay. But I would just practice this over and over until you can get to the point where you can guess really well. That's what I did.
Okay, I want
Yeah.
to get to
Yeah,
some
yeah.
other questions.
Okay, more questions.
There's other good questions.
Okay.
Celsius, thank you for this question, but it was a little.
It was interesting, but a little bit confusing. And I probably did it wrong, and I apologize.
Let's see. Isaiah asks, how do you go about picking what you study? And better put, let's just say a person loves to draw, What would you suggest a good practice regimen would look like? How often do you redraw the same subject?
It's a good question. I mean, the way I would think of it is more like as if you were at an actual school, kind of like I was saying earlier. So in terms of what to pick to study, I would treat it as though you were like at Watts or like taking my classes and break it down as like, okay, you need to study head drawing, you need to study figure drawing. There's different ways you can do that, right? You can do like longer studies, you can do 20-minute drawings, you can do quick sketch, you can do anatomy studies, you can do master studies, right? Those are kind of like all your, I mean, there's more options than that, but let's say those are your options. And then you would have to break it down as though you were at a school, and figure out like, okay, how much time do you want to spend on each of those? If you're newer, I would probably recommend spending like more time on like the longer construction type stuff until it starts to become a little bit more intuitive. And then you can then focus on speeding things up and working more like on the 20-minute stuff, the quick sketch stuff. But that's just me. Like some people take the quick sketch much easier. I wasn't one of those people. I had a really hard time with it. But that would be my recommendation, is literally treat it like you are a student at an actual school, and you're there to study these fundamental subjects, and yeah, kind of work accordingly. What was the question? Did that answer it?
I think so. Just what does a good practice regimen look like if you just love to draw? And how often do you redraw the same subject?
Oh, I redraw the same. It depends. Like if you're saying the same subject as in like the same topic, like head drawing, draw it over and over. If you're talking about like the same piece of reference or working from the same photo or doing the exact same drawing or the same master study, I repeat them occasionally, but as a student, I didn't repeat them very often. As an instructor, it comes up more often because, at this, we only have so much photo reference, so I end up drawing things multiple times sometimes. But I would say as a student, I didn't redraw the same things a lot unless I had trouble with them. If it was something that gave me a lot of trouble and I had a hard time with it, then later I would go back and try it again because I wanted to know if I really improved or not. And one way to do that is to see if I still find those things to be really challenging, and so usually it would end up being a little bit easier the next time. And not the exception, but one of the things that I repeated intentionally was master studies. There were a couple times where I went back and did a second master study of the same like Rockwell or Leyendecker painting that I had done before. And that really helps kind of solidify things a little bit. And what you'll find is you learn totally different stuff each time you do that. It's pretty amazing. When you're first starting out with a master study, like you really just kind of learn, you're not at the point where you can copy all their shape design and like all the really advanced stuff. When you're first starting out and you do a master study, it's really more just about getting things placed properly on the page, getting the proportions correct, and that takes like all your mental energy just to do that. And then as those types of things start to become more intuitive and they take less effort, then you could go back and do the exact same master study again, and you'll find that suddenly it's different, and you'll find that like you get different stuff out of it, and it's much more, I don't know, suddenly instead of focusing on, just getting everything in the right spot, suddenly you're focused more on like their actual shape design and what type of edges are they using and what type of, do the values match? Like, you'll be focused on different things. And so there's value in redoing master studies for that reason. But aside from that, I didn't repeat things too often. I think that answered it. I hope.
I think so.
I did so much talking, I forget what the question is.
How often do you redraw the same subject?
Oh yeah, that was it.
I think you answered it. Okay. I've got another question for you here from Wayne Jones.
Okay.
Who says, hi Brian, hi Olivia.
Hello.
I'd like to study in the next head tilt course.
Okay.
I only have a tablet and very limited computer skills. Is this enough to get through the course?
It should be. Yeah, I mean, working from a tablet should be fine. I don't know how big your tablet is, but really you just need to be able to watch the demo. So assuming you can watch a video reasonably clearly on your tablet, I think that should work okay. And then you need to be able to look at the photo reference, you know, and I know that'll work on a tablet because I'm looking at a laptop that's about tablet sized right now. And yeah. Then the question is, are you going to be working on the tablet, like drawing on the tablet? That gets a little more complicated. But if you're working traditionally, like I am, like with pencil and paper, and just using the tablet to watch the demo and to, you know, look at the reference and stuff, I think that should work just fine. Definitely. And if you take the head drawing class with the tilts, then I will see you there. It's going to be a fun class. I've never taught that one before. It's a new idea. I was about to say a new idea that I came up with, but it's also actually one that people have asked about many times. I don't know if I can take credit for it. Okay, so basically right now I'm just going in and looking for some shadow shapes. You know, capturing that little bit of light. He's got a little bit of light on his eyelid right in here, and then a little bit on the brow, or kind of that little like fold where that fat pad is up above, like right in there. So we want to try and capture that. But remember, when we're dealing with mapping and shadows and stuff, we always want to work with complete shapes. So everything I do should kind of loop back around on itself and connect into a complete shape. Right, so in this case, this entire eye is in shadow. Yeah, but as far as working with the tablet, I think it should work fine. It's not too much different from what I'm doing right now. A little bit of shadow in through there. Right, but notice, creating a complete shape, this entire thing makes one big shadow shape up in here. Right, and then this one's going to connect kind of down in through here. So we get a shadow. Underneath the lid. Drops back down around here. Cuts up a little bit. And then we get a little bit of shadow like in the eye socket. Kind of down in here, like a little bit of maybe orbicularis oculi or something, one of those muscles. So we have to decide, do we want to put this in? Does it look too complicated when we do this? Is it getting too, like, is there kind of starting to be too much going on here? It's possible. Could be an issue. And then we have to figure out, like, how these shadows, are they going to link together with the cheekbone? I think it does, which means then it has to also link together up into this shadow up in the temple up here. So it gets a little more complicated. So this is going to sit a little bit lower. Kind of connect into our cheekbone shape out here. Right, thinking about edges. Shape, value, and edge is everything we want to be thinking about right now. So then this is going to connect kind of up into these shapes up around in here. And then this is tricky as well, right? Because he's got a shadow kind of like up at the top of the muscle, kind of between like the muscle on the forehead that sits up here. And then there's a big muscle like the temporalis or something on the side of the head over here. And there's like a shadow kind of in between them, like right in here. So we're going to pick up a little bit of shadow kind of on the back of the head. And kind of following this muscle across here. It's going to be very soft, right? Which basically means a gradient, right? We're going to use like a gradient for a line, kind of. And it kind of comes back out. Pops around this way. Something kind of like that. I'm not super happy with that shape, but it's in the right spot more or less. I was going to kind of make it follow this up in here because that's kind of like where the, I don't know, there's like a rhythm that kind of runs up in through there, but I think it is going to look better if we just let it kind of follow back this way. All right, keep it nice and soft because this stuff is very round. We'll just kind of leave it like that for now. I don't know. I think it could be better, but I don't want to spend too much time on it. It seems pretty good. So you can see, once again, complete shape, although it's not completed yet, but we're basically taking this entire shape for shadow in here, and then this kind of ends back in here, right? So this is a shadow shape, goes all the way down here, but then it needs to connect to something down here, right? So we've got an ending for it up here. Now we need to keep working our way down into the cheekbone and figuring out. Although notice, I just said we need to go to the cheekbone, but what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to move back over here, and then I'm going to kind of work my way back over this way, and then eventually bring them together in the middle. Now, studying features is really important because they are not easy. They're complicated and have a big impact on your drawing. You know, so if you haven't spent a lot of time studying noses and eyes and ears, mouths, lips, it's going to be a little bit challenging. Right, so we've got shadow here on his nose. right? And then we're going to get a cast shadow down onto his cheek, kind of over here. So I'm going to shrink that shape a little bit. Right, so we get our cast shadow kind of coming out this direction, dropping back this way a little bit, and then notice I'm letting it get softer as we work our way down, because cast shadows follow specific rules where they get softer, the edges of the cast shadows get softer as we get farther away from the thing that's casting the shadow. Like that. I'm going to let that be completely in shadow over here for this nostril. And then what's happening now is we're picking up shadow on the beard, which means even though we're kind of close to the nose up here, I'm still going to make it really soft, because anytime a shadow hits hair, it becomes a very soft type edge. You know, so that's going to be kind of our cast shadow. And then we're going to get a shadow on the beard itself here, which is always a little bit complicated, but we can figure it out. Right, so that beard is going to roll into shadow. And then we're getting a cast shadow from the beard and the lip down onto the bottom lip, right? So this area gets kind of complicated. So we've got to come in here and figure out what that's going to look like. And it's not super easy. So the bottom lip is kind of starting roughly about here. Got our cast shadow kind of coming down this way. And it's kind of cutting over the lip like this direction. Kind of cutting over a little bit. And then we get shadow down around this way. A little bit on the side plane of the beard. And then we're also picking up shadow right in here. Right, kind of like where his lip is like sticking out. We're seeing shadow right in here. Right, and then we get mostly light on the beard up in here. Up and in, and then we get a little bit of a cast shadow kind of down onto the beard. That's about it for that area. Now later we're gonna have to go in, like we'd fill all this in, bring it up to 2 value, and then we'd have to go add some darker darks within there to separate the lips within that big shadow shape. But for right now, I think this is gonna have to do. Throw a couple like little beard indications in real quick, just so we know that we're drawing beard.
Can I do another question?
Yeah.
There are a lot of questions, but
Okay.
I just want to let you make some progress on the drawing and
Yeah, that's cool.
you know. But there's some really good questions. I want to read one from Juan Hernandez.
Yeah.
Who says, "Hi Brian, have you ever experienced back pain as a result of sitting for a long time drawing? If so, what do you recommend to reduce the pain?"
Yes, I have experienced back pain. So when I was younger, I had a lot of back problems. I mean, and I don't know if it was drawing related so much as just genetics or something. I don't really know. And just being out of shape, I think, in hindsight. Yeah, so I started out, I mean, I even had spine surgery at one point. Like, I had a whole bunch of back problems. And for a while, that was a huge problem when it came to drawing, especially when I first started, because they were much worse back then. And the thing that helped me the most was spending a lot of time stretching. Like, a lot. Like, I started spending, like, I don't know, an hour or two a day stretching, like every single day, doing a lot of like hip stretches and legs, especially like your quads, and like piriformis is an important one to stretch. And that helped me tremendously. Will that work for everybody? I don't know, but it helped me. And then on top of that, the other thing that helped was I started walking and running a lot, which it seemed counterintuitive because at first I was like, well, it hurts to walk and run. But then the more that I stretched and the more I did it, the more I realized that it actually helped a lot. And now I'm pretty much pain free in terms, in terms of my back, and have been for some time. And I attribute that all to walking and stretching. It's important. I mean, if you're spending too much time sitting, you're going to start having back pain for sure. I mean, that's kind of what I've learned over the years. And when that starts happening, the only way to beat it is to get up and go move around. And it doesn't fix it immediately. It takes time. Like, you got to like go do that consistently for a number of weeks until it really starts to help. But it will help. At least in my experience, it helped. So yeah, I totally get that. I mean, I had very bad back problems for a long time. And eventually, not so much. But it took a while to figure that out and to figure out kind of what to do about it. It's not fun. Back pain is no fun at all.
I can also add when I had a lot of back pain myself.
Yeah.
Same thing, sitting too much. I had a lot of lower back pain.
Yeah.
And I really had things change for me when I started lifting weights and doing a lot of core strengthening type exercises. But yeah, resting does not help at all. It always seems to be like stretching, walking, running, and
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive. Like, you think like, oh, my back's hurt, I need to rest. But it's weird. There's something about backs where resting makes them worse. You need to go do stuff, but it needs to be stuff that doesn't cause back pain. It needs to just be like walking, stretching, or weightlifting, like you were saying. I mean, there's a lot of different things that can help. Oh, let's get some shadow on this ear.
are you good with another question?
Yeah,
yeah.
Okay. Bring it on. More questions.
From Constantinus, is Cretacolor tin sets worth buying? I'm not sure what that is.
I don't know what those are. The Cretacolor tin sets? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Cretacolor, I can look it up real quick, maybe. I don't know. To be honest, I can't say. I don't think I've used them before. Cretacolor.
This doesn't look like something I've ever seen you use.
Tin set.
This looks kind of cool though.
They do look cool. They seem like you could do some cool stuff with them from what I'm seeing. Graded color. There's a black box tin set. I don't know. I've never used them. To be honest, I really can't say. I mean, they look like you could do some cool stuff probably, but man, and it depends also on what type of paper you're using, what type of other supplies you have. Because like the way that I'm drawing right now, like on smooth newsprint, you need very specific pencils for that to work exactly the way you see me doing it right now. And just any pencil won't work. I suspect those Cretacolor pencils probably won't work quite the same way on smooth newsprint, but I would bet that there's a lot of papers out there that they would work pretty well with. They look like they would work really well on like toned paper maybe. So yeah, honestly, I can't answer that. I don't really know, mostly just because I've never used them before. That ear is mostly in shadow. I'm not going to worry about it too much. Let's get a little bit of... So here's the other problem we have, right? Like this seems like I mapped it, but there's no ending to this shadow, right? We have shadow all the way up here. We've created a complete shape that goes down here, around here, boom, back around here. But then it just stops, right? So there's no ending to it. So we've got to get... I mean, we could, in theory, say, well, we just want it to end at the beard. That would be fine. If you just wanted to not draw the neck, then it could just end at the beard. That would be fine. But if we want to be really technically correct, then we need to find a way to complete this shadow. Right, so this shadow comes all the way down here. We get some trapezius here. And then it's kind of also coming down this way. Ramping right into here, down this way a little bit, kind of down into the pit of his neck, which got cropped a little bit from the photo, but pretty sure we can just kind of make that up. Now remember what I was saying about cast shadows, right? The farther they're cast away from an object, the softer the edges get. And so if this is a cast shadow from his head, way up here, so this is going to have pretty soft edges for the most part. Except for where it kind of like bumps up against certain things, right? Where we start hitting the collarbone right here. So we might get a little bit harder edge right in here where it's hitting the collarbone, and then it's going to kind of like soften up again. Kind of down that way. That seems pretty good. It's just a better beard indication on here because it looks a little generic at the moment. Is there more questions?
Yes. There are a ton.
Oh, a ton. All right.
There are lots of questions.
That's good. That's a good sign. That means there's people watching. So
yeah,
good.
There are some people watching. There's 21 watching right now.
Nice.
That's pretty good. Let's see. Juan Hernandez says, I take note. Thank you very much for the advice.
You're welcome, one.
And there's another question from Jesse, who asked, "Hi Brian and Olivia, can you recommend a few books or artists to study facial features / anatomy?" And he also wrote something else to Celsius about how to draw comics the Marvel way.
Oh yeah, that's a good book.
Oh, he's talking about Celsius, because Celsius submitted another comment about the X to box method, but I don't want to derail your drawing.
Yeah.
Sorry, Celsius. Maybe at the end we should try it again.
We can try it again.
Because it was interesting, but I just don't want to get you off track here.
Yeah, that's cool.
So let's focus on Jesse's question about, can you recommend a few books or artists to study facial features / anatomy?
Yeah, so as far as studying facial features, I mean, I would say Vanderpool is really good. I mean, he's one of the main ones I studied. I feel like I have that sitting here. Maybe not. Do you see a little book down here?
Yes, it's just beyond what you're reaching for. Oh. Here, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you.
There you go.
This is the Vanderpool book. John H. Vanderpool. This guy's really good for features. I've studied these many times. And they're interesting, right? Like the drawings, it's a mix of stuff like this, where you have these big pages where he's probably working in charcoal or something. And then there's things like this, where you get these little tiny drawings off to the side. All of them are really good. I mean, even though the print quality isn't great on these, you could study these shapes. I mean, they're very clear, even though they're not printed super well. All of these are just really, really clear shapes. So Vanderpool is awesome. I would recommend this book. Doing full value studies of these, doing little construction studies of them. And he's got all the features, right? We've got eyes, we've got noses, we've got lips, ears. This is where I got the break ears into thirds. I always teach that in my facial feature class, right? When we talk about ears, there's an ear week. And I take the ear and break it into thirds. And that comes straight from this Vanderpool book, right? We can take this and break it into thirds. And in theory, roughly, it should be from the top of the ear to the bottom of the antihelix, or the little triangular fossa, or whatever that part of the antihelix is. And then down to kind of the bottom of the notch, and then down to the bottom of the lobe, right? Should be relatively equal thirds. That comes straight from here. So there's all sorts of useful stuff in here. And then he's got the rest of the body too, but to be honest, as good as he is, I think there's better things to study when it comes to the rest of the body. I mean, these aren't bad or anything. They're good drawings. They'd be good to study. You can tell this is very Bridgman-like. You can tell he was I don't think he was a student of Bridgman's, but maybe maybe he was a student of Bridgman's. They were around the same time, and I think they knew each other because Bridgman wrote the foreword to this thing. And so there's a couple of drawings in here that are very Bridgman-like. And when I first saw them, I thought, oh man, they put the wrong drawing in here. They put a Bridgman drawing. And then I realized Bridgman wrote the foreword and that they knew each other. There's another one in here that's super Bridgman-like, if I can find it. This could be straight out of the Bridgman book. So I think he was doing Bridgman studies too, but he's really good. So Vanderpool, and then Bridgman also, who I also happen to have sitting here, is good for features. But what's weird is Bridgman draws heads in kind of a weird way. No offense to Bridgman. Let's see if I can find the head stuff. These are kind of cool. Got some skulls. Yeah, so when he draws heads, they look a little blocky. I don't know. You have to be really careful, right? What you study is going to influence how you draw. So you have to pick and choose accordingly. If you look at this head and you think I don't know if I want my drawing to look kind of like that, then don't study it, right? It's as simple as that. So I've never studied full Bridgman heads because I don't like the way they look. This one's kind of cool. But a lot of them are a little odd. But what he's good at, and the reason I brought this out, is he's really good at features and designing individual features when he does that. See if I can find it, right? So like studying, if I can find it here. Oh, here's the eye, right? To go in and study just this eye shape and kind of the planes of the eye and the way he's locking it together, the way it's overlapping on itself here and here. That's all good stuff to study, right? He's got pretty cool little ear shapes. For some reason, when he draws individual features, they're super helpful. And then when he goes to draw a whole head, I don't know. I don't like it as much, but that's just me. I don't know. If you like if you like Bridgman heads and you think the heads look awesome, then you should study those too, right? Awesome lip shapes. But this, like if I drew that, I would kind of feel like I need to study a little bit more. Again, no offense to Bridgman. It's just a look, I guess. So basically what I'm getting at is just be careful what you study and just know that it's okay to skip things, right? Especially with Bridgman. It's okay to look at something and be like, I don't want my drawing to look like that. So don't study it, right? And just pick out the parts that you like and that you think look really cool and the things that you would like to be in your drawing. And study those things. You know, it's as simple as that. I mean, I wouldn't say it's simple, but that's the idea. And then How to Draw the Comics of Marvel Way is awesome too. I like that book. That was one of my first drawing books. I think that's everybody's first drawing book, maybe. It's really cool. I like Buscema's drawings, or Buscema. I don't know how to say his name, but he was one of my favorite comic book artists for a long time. I've run out of things to draw. We could fill this in and bring it up to like 2 value maybe. What time is it? Oh, no, we're kind of out of time. Could draw some eyebrows maybe. I don't know. I don't mind it like this, to be honest. Just connect this eyebrow shape. Yeah, more questions are good because I'm running out of stuff to draw. I don't want to render this thing because it's going to take a long time and we don't have time for it. But I can do more questions, yeah.
Okay, I have just 2 more I think that we could go over. That would be good.
Okay.
So the first one is from Isaiah, who...
Isaiah.
Yeah, Isaiah's back. And Isaiah asks, do you study perspective in and of itself or only in regards to how it pertains to drawing figures and anatomy?
That's a good question. I studied perspective pretty extensively as a student. Not super extensively. Like I didn't get way into like drawing vehicles and spaceships and that kind of stuff, but I want to, and that's something I plan on doing. But I studied all the perspective like fundamentals and all the concepts. Basically, I took the perspective class at Watts a number of times, and then as an instructor, because I mean I pretty much went straight from being a student to a teacher, and then as an instructor I taught it a number of times, and consequently I studied a lot of perspective, you know, and it's something that has helped me tremendously, and I would highly recommend it. I don't know. There's just something about the concepts and how understanding how to break down 3-dimensional space on a 2-dimensional surface. And even though you're not going to use a lot of that stuff in a head or figure drawing, and you're really just kind of using basic box shapes, taking the time to study all that stuff, I found to be very helpful. But that's just me. I mean, at the very least, you need to study the basics, like the actual fundamental perspective stuff. And it's complicated. Perspective is not easy. It's a very complicated thing. It's as complicated as you want it to be. You know, like it could be relatively simple. You know, like I just taught like an intro to drawing class, and on the second week, maybe. I don't know. I think it was the second week. I went over just some real basic, like here's some 1-point perspective. Here's how 2-point perspective works and 3-point perspective. And we just drew some boxes. And that was about it. And understanding that is probably enough if you only want to do head and figure drawing. But as soon as you want to become anything more than just somebody that draws heads and figures, you know, if you want to take those people and put them in some sort of illustration or situation, you got to know perspective. I mean, there's really just no other way. I don't know how else you could do all that and make it look good at a level that's going to like get you work, you know? Like you're competing with a lot of people that know perspective very well. And if you don't also know it very well, you're going to be at a disadvantage. So, yeah, I mean, part of it just depends on what you want to do, but I think you're always going to be better off knowing more perspective rather than less. But that's just me. And that just comes from the fact that as I learned more about it, my drawings got better and better. And eventually I realized that knowing all that perspective had a lot to do with it.
There's a little discussion going on. Oh, it's Navad is both comments. Navad's having a discussion with Navad about did Vanderpool and Bridgman teach at the same school at the same time? And then he said, you know what, no, I don't think that's right. But something I saw when looking this up was that Limedecker was a Vanderpool student. Do you know any of the history about these?
All I know is that they were all alive around the same time and that they all kind of learned from each other a bit and like knew each other. But I don't know much more other than that. I should probably know more because it would be good to know because people ask about it. And it's just interesting. Because it's kind of like a, you know, it's like a lineage of like where all this information came from. And I don't know, it'd be interesting to know more about it. I don't know that much, no. But I would like to. I do know, I mean, we could look it up and find out pretty quick. Like if you just looked up like when Vanderpool was teaching. Did Vanderpool teach at that Art Students League thing? I'm going to look it up and find out. This is going to become the most boring live stream for a minute here. John Vanderpool. According to Wikipedia. Goes way back. In 1886, he went to Europe and studied for 2 years in Paris. Let's see. I don't know. This thing talks about how George Bridgman wrote the foreword to his book, but it doesn't say they knew each other. I don't know. I'm going to have to figure this out later, but I would like to know more about it because I know there's a whole lineage. I know like at Watts, like Eric at one point mapped out the lineage of like all that, you know, all the training and instructors. And it went from like, you know, like Jeff Watts learned from like Glenn Orbick, who learned from Fred Fixler, who learned from Riley, who learned from, I want to say Bridgman, maybe. No, there might be somebody in between there. I don't know. And then it goes back through Bridgman. And basically, he could trace it like all the way back to like Renaissance times, pretty much. Like that's really where this information comes from. I mean, it's been around a long time and handed down from person to person. And, you know, it's almost like, I don't know, it's an interesting system. And it all comes through those little like atelier type schools, you know, where this stuff is just handed down from person to person. And eventually it ends up in this live stream. Okay, if there's no more questions, I think we're kind of done because I'm running out of stuff to draw. I don't really want to render it. I could bring it up to like a 2 value level maybe. But it's been like a couple hours.
Yeah, we're at about 100 So almost 2 hours.
Yeah.
We've had some really good discussion this time.
Good.
We covered a lot of ground.
I think so. I'll say this area feels a little long on my drawing. But overall, not too bad. It's tough to draw his head leaned back because his jaw is so big that when you lean his head back, it still sits kind of low. It's just kind of unique to his head. Yes, I think we've reached the end. So I'm just kind of picking away at this thing now. Any more or no?
Unless one just popped up on the table.
So if not, then we are done.
Wayne Jones says, thanks, Brian.
You're welcome, Wayne Jones. Thank you for watching.
Also, Celsius asked one more question. He says, I have one quick question. What stool bench setup are you using?
I have a drawing horse. My setup, I don't know. I mean, it's nothing too complicated. It's a drawing horse, but the problem with the drawing horse thing is, as well as they work, for some reason, they're really expensive if you go to buy one. I don't know why. It's just some wood stuck together, but it's really expensive. And then, I don't know, if you try and make your own, it's kind of a pain. They're a big pain. So you can easily just use like 2 chairs and just sit in one chair and then turn one around backward and lean your board against the chair in front of you. That works pretty well. The main thing you want in your setup is for your board to not be locked in place necessarily. Like I can, I have it leaned against here, and so I can move it like this as needed, or just set it on my knees, and I can move it down on my knees and make it flatter. I can put it out this way and angle it more. I can do a lot of stuff with it, which is cool. So the thing you want to, I guess what I'm getting at is the thing you want to avoid is leaning your board against the wall. Because as soon as you lean it against the wall, then like the whole thing's flat against the wall and you can't move it anymore. It's like stuck. So you want to avoid that. So you can lean it on the edge of a desk. You can lean it on the back of a chair. You could even have it on a table, like a drafting board or something, as long as the top isn't like locked down and you can still rotate it, that's fine. Like you just want to be able to move it around. That's really what it comes down to. And you want to be able to work at like arm's length, kind of. You don't want to be too close. And ideally you want to be able to lean back from it a little bit and look at it from a distance from time to time. And that's about it. And then a lot of this depends on how big you're working, right? Because what I'm saying right now relates mostly to this big 18 by 24 inch board, which is huge. I shouldn't zoom out too far. You're going to see how messy this is over here, which is a really big board, right? So if you're like working on, say, like a comic book page, those pages are a lot smaller. They're like this size maybe, and then to do that, you could either clip it to a board or you could set it on a table. You just need to be able to move it around is all it really comes down to. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's what I would say about my seating arrangement. It's not the seat that's important so much as the ability to move the board around.
There's one more question.
Okay.
This is from Ryden Williams.
Ryden, welcome.
Ryden says, I can't decide between doing your Regimen course and the structural figure course. Can you really quickly let me know the main differences between the two and the benefits? I'm having trouble deciding. Thanks.
So in the structural figure drawing course, that's a class I've taught many times and one that I invented and I'm quite proud of because it was pretty popular. But in that class, what we do is for the first 3 weeks of that class, we cover arms on 1 week, legs on another week, and then torso on the third week. Each week starts with like a brief anatomy lecture where I actually just, I get these like models back behind me. I don't know if you guys can see them, but I have these like anatomy models and a skeleton. And I'll, say like, okay, we're doing arms. I'll do a brief anatomy lecture, talk about all the important arm anatomy, and then we'll go in and work from reference, like a whole bunch of arm reference photos and just draw arms that week, and then we do the same thing with legs. Then we do the same thing with torsos. And then on the last 2 weeks, we just do some figure drawing, but the focus is on the combination of gesture and structure, right? Which is kind of where the structural part comes in, is we figure out how do we establish a quick gesture? How do we turn that into three-dimensional forms like cylinders and blocks? And then what do we do with the anatomy, right? Because we don't want to go in and draw every single muscle every time. Like that's, you don't usually need that. If you're doing an anatomy study, that's cool. But we need to figure out how to use anatomy to our advantage and how to use that to guide our overlaps that we create, right? So like overlap is what helps create depth in a drawing. And as we move an arm into different angles, things are going to overlap in different ways. And we're going to use the anatomy to help create those overlaps and to help maintain that three-dimensional feel as we add the anatomy on top of our structure. So that's basically what the structural anatomy or structural figure drawing class is about. The Regimen class is going to be run in a very similar way, where for the first 3 weeks, we will do arms, and then week 2 will be legs, week 3 will be torso. But rather than like the structural figure drawing class where I'm just doing a lecture, a brief anatomy lecture, and then working from reference, we're going to be working from the Regimen book for those first 3 weeks and studying how he designs anatomy and kind of how he does what he calls wedging, which to me is one of the most important concepts, which is how he basically talks about how there's no spaces between the muscles, right? Which is a pretty common problem when you're first starting out and you try and draw anatomy. You're not like squishing things together enough, right? And he calls it wedging. You have to like wedge it together and make sure that every muscle is pressed up against another muscle. And then on top of that, we're going to look at how he designs stuff and like how he thinks of the body as like a machine a little bit, like kind of like pulley systems. I don't know if we'll be drawing a lot of that, but we'll be talking about it. And then we'll be focused kind of more on like wedging and how everything fits together. And then also how he's designing it, and so we'll kind of be taking the stuff that we talk about in the normal anatomy class and looking at it through the eyes of Regimen a little bit and figuring out like why does it look the way it does? How does a Regimen drawing, why does it look like a Regimen drawing? What makes it look like a Regimen drawing? And what is he doing that makes it seem that way? And then kind of like the structural figure drawing class, in the last 2 weeks, we're going to be working from figure reference photos. But we're going to be trying to take some of that Regimen knowledge and apply it to the figure drawings, right? So we'll be trying to create a figure drawing that has a little bit of a Regimen look to it. It doesn't need to be like an exact Regimen replica, but we want to take at least a little bit of that and kind of like inject it back into our figure drawing so we can kind of figure out how to use that stuff to our advantage. And that's it. That's the difference between them. As far as which one to take, I mean, I would say whichever one sounds interesting to you. I mean, yeah, which one do you think you would benefit from the most, I guess? Which is tough because you're probably thinking like, well, maybe I could benefit from both of those, but I can only take one. I would say if you're someone who's looked at the Regimen book a lot of times and thought like, man, what do I do with this book? Which I know a lot of people do. And that's the whole reason I'm teaching the class, because I started out as one of those people. Then the Regimen class would probably be good. That would probably be my recommendation. But the structural figure drawing class is really good too. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I'm the right person to pick because I like them both. And yeah, I don't know. Hopefully that answers your question. I don't know if that helps you pick which one, but that is the difference between them. And I don't know. If you have more questions about it, you can just message me on Discord or Instagram or something, and I can tell you more about them. Cool. So that's pretty much the end. That is the end, and we're going to stop because I haven't actually drawn anything in a long time. I'm just sitting here messing with this thing. Okay. I need you to push the button.
Oh, okay.
Or I can go push it.
Oh, I'll do it.
Okay.
Oh, Ryden has
Ryden,
an additional
he
question.
wrote, is one much more advanced than the other? The only... Oh, I've only done your fundamental figure drawing 2 terms ago. What is a good next step? Oh, that's a good question. I think either of them would be okay. I would say the Bridgman one is probably more advanced, but not necessarily. I think you would like the structural figure drawing class. Yeah, I don't know. That's what I would say. I don't know if one's advanced. One's based more on like a master study. It's almost like an extended master study in a way, like the Bridgman one. So I don't know if that's what you need necessarily. But if you've done the fundamental figure thing, then the structural figure drawing is probably good to go after that, because we're going to be taking all those same concepts we talked about in that fundamental figure class and really kind of diving into them a little bit deeper. So I think that'd be good. Yeah. That's my opinion. Anyway, that's the end. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it. And I will see you next week. Goodbye.